Oh, I kind of love Mondays now because of that jaunty intro there. The backup is
Welcome
where
to
we
the
talk
club.
about the most hard-hitting news of the week, as long as it's related to video games. And as usual, the Back Podcast is brought to you by Hero Pocketeer Tim from the Learn Programming Academy. Get your exclamation mark Tims out in the chat because the Learn Programming Academy offers classes covering the entire range of programming that are easy to watch for all skill levels, and they're almost all $20 or less. Head to lpa.dev/backpocket to download the custom backpocket info guide on everything, and I do mean everything, Tim has to offer, and become the coding genius you didn't know you always were. Alrighty, let's jump into story number one. Apparently, The Last of Us 3 story outline has already been written, but we may not ever actually see the game. Joe Scrabbles from IGN writes that creative director Neil Druckmann says he hopes it can one day see the light of day. Speaking on an episode of the Script Apart podcast about the writing of The Last of Us Part 2, Druckmann touched briefly on the possibility of a sequel, saying, quote, "I don't know how much I want to reveal. Co-writer Haley Gross and I did write an outline for the story we're not making, but I hope one day can see the light of day. That explores a little bit what happens after this game. We'll see." Druckmann says there's been, quote, quite a bit of discussion internally about Part 3, but pointed out that how much work is goes into making a game like this become a reality, saying, quote, "These games take so much to make. Part 2, I've been thinking about it for 7 years between when the last game came out and when this came out. You want to make sure you're jazzed by the idea that you have, that it feels like it's challenging." We've had 2 games that I feel speak to something universal as well as telling a very personal story for these characters. With 1 game, there's no pattern of what a franchise is. With 2 games, now there's starting to be a pattern. Now I feel like there is some structural and thematic themes you have to stick to if you're making a 3rd game. Which is a pretty interesting point he's making there about the idea of, like, you know, when you make a 3rd thing, it kind of has to be the same but a bit different, I suppose. I listened to this podcast over the weekend as well, and Pete, you loved The Last of Us Part 2, I think.
I did.
The most out of the 3 of us?
Maybe. I mean, I'm not going to let Gus have a word while he's trying to sort out his problems, but he doesn't know. Let's see. Nah, you're just totally muted now. You've muted yourself. Yes, I did love The Last of Us 2, though I do feel like it was thematically similar to The Last of Us 1. I don't think there's like I don't know if he's claiming that he had some more liberation with writing a 2nd script than he does with a 3rd in terms of like the directions he could have gone, but I don't think he changed the formula enough in Last of Us 2 to go like, oh right, this could have been a wacky like anything goes series. It's like it's very grounded, and obviously thematically there's some variation in terms of what the characters are kind of struggling with, and particularly the perspective that struggle is happening from changes between 1 and 2. But, you know, I think I never wanted to see a Last of Us 2, and then we got Last of Us 2, and now I would be totally okay seeing a Last of Us 3, because I think the important thing to me is that the amount of care they put into these stories, I don't think they would falter on. So I'd be happy for them to have another crack in the world with some of the same characters. But it is all very depressing.
It is all very depressing. Yeah, that's interesting. I do feel like with Part 2, I think that I've kind of internalized the and I guess are we still in structural spoilers for that game, do you think? Like the storytelling perspective? I'm going to say yeah. Like, I'll just play on the safe side. If you've played it, you know what I'm talking about. But just, I do think that I've kind of internalized how big a leap that was. And I've kind of just gone, oh yeah, that's just what they did. But I do think they take a pretty big swing narrative-wise in terms of like the storytelling perspective that you were not expecting, I guess, after Part 1. But I definitely agree that after Part 1, I was like, I don't need to see more of this. And after Part 2, I'm like, I definitely don't need to see more of this. But it's actually like, I feel like that about every story until you prove that, no, you do actually have something else there to tell. It's just that with every successive story you tell, you actually have less and less things to mine if you're not building out a universe and you're just telling like the story of the same people all the time. It just, I guess, becomes harder to make. It was an interesting. I definitely recommend listening to that episode of the Script Apart podcast if you're interested in The Last of Us Part 2, because both writers go into pretty good detail about. Particularly, like as a script nerd, they start having arguments about like which script guru they adhere to and sort of writing structure style. So yeah, there's some good listening there. Gus, is there good listening for you?
I agree.
I think we're good.
Okay, good.
We're all agreeable.
That's exciting.
I agree entirely. I apologize to everyone. I caught most of the end of that, but I was having some technical issues. Sorry. Yeah, I will just add like the final point there, Nick, about the idea that after 1, you were like, I don't need to see any more of this story. And then 2, you're even more double down on that. Like, I totally agree. But after having my sort of my value shaken in the idea of being like, no, they couldn't tell a story that moves me as much as the first one. I would kind of be open to the idea of where they want to go with it. I just think they need to make bolder kind of like creative decisions about which characters they follow and stuff. But I'm off topic a little bit, but I do feel like the idea of the HBO show is totally what would play into the idea that like that's where that story needs to flourish versus an interactive version of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you interested? Are either of you interested in the idea of like a Last of Us world where they do move away from the Joel and Ellie, or like I guess just those people, and start expanding a universe in a more meaningful way?
No, that's what Days Gone is for. There's enough zombie stuff, and like when The Last of Us got announced, I'm like, oh, another freaking zombie story. The Last of Us has proved to be much more intimate than most zombie genre stuff gives us. And I think that's the way it should stay. And I don't want to see the mobile tower defense Last of Us.
Ooh.
Build your bit. Gus wants to see that.
I'm just saying, like, yeah, I totally agree with Pete. I think people got swept up and maybe kind of semi-naively into the idea of thinking the Last of Us world is better than other zombie worlds. It is it's interesting, but they're thinking that because they're being swept up in the characters and the writing and the performances of those people in it. So it's like, yeah, essentially saying, hey, what happened if we take this very cliched, very overused kind of like end of the world dystopian dystopian kind of like zombie apocalypse, and we drill down and just like put a microscope over these like this centralized relationship, and people are like, oh, I love the Last of Us world. I'm like, yeah, it's some beautiful rambling guitar and some like, you know, ruined buildings. It's like,
yeah, and
exactly
some mushroom
the same
people, and that's about it.
Yeah, we've seen it in everything. So yeah, I totally agree that it's like I don't want to see the world expanded, but I'll maybe the card game, or like
even to the point where like
the dating sim.
Zombies, even in the game, are the lamest part of the game. It's like, oh, there has to be a boss fight because this is a video game, and therefore there needs to be a big zombie. And it's like, okay, like that's the least interesting thing in your video game.
And how often do you play a game where you push through the action to get to those amazing cutscenes and story beats? It's like very often we've been brought up incorrectly playing the other way, which is like, oh, stop talking, I want to get to the gameplay, which is, this is a perfect version of the opposite of that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You remove Joel and Ellie and you just go like, they're hitting every beat that a normal, like the factions of the world and the humans are the real monsters and all that sort of thing. Like there's nothing particularly original there. Yeah, more breaking news for Gus. So we'll see if The Last of Us Part 3 ever eventuates, but if it does, it sounds like it will be a very, very long time off. By that point, maybe developers will be earning a little bit more money on Steam, because at the moment, most game devs don't think that Steam earns their 30% cut. Tyler Wilde from PC Gamer writes that Steam is the dominant PC game distributor by far, but the majority of game developers don't think Valve is earning its 30% revenue cut. In a survey of over 3,000 game industry professionals, mostly from North America and Europe, only 3% said that it's fair for stores such as Steam and GOG to take 30% of their revenue. Another 3% said that more than 30% is justified, but most think that the cut should be lowered. 43% said that a 10 to 15% cut is justified. The question, which appeared in the 2021 GDC State of the Games Industry Survey, was worded, quote, "What do you think is a justifiable amount for your games revenue, for digital storefronts, e.g. Steam, Epic Games Store, App Store, to take?" And a similar question was asked in the 2020 survey, although it was aimed directly at Steam. In that survey, just 7% of respondents said that 30% or more was justified. So the 30-70 split has been something that's been around for ages. Steam, obviously, that platform where I will speak for myself, but I think I speak for a lot of people, where you go, it's the first thing you think of when you think of video games on PC. Is it time to retire the 30% cut? Is that a good move of goodwill, Gus, for Steam to do, or are they just making too much money and are in too powerful a position to follow Epic's lead with their 12% cut?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'm like by no means a games economist or anything, and don't know where that where that sort of split should sit. But I think maybe like the idea of opening it up for a rediscussion, renegotiating, or coming up with a better system possibly could be something there. Again, this is all something I'm speculating about, so I wouldn't say but possibly some sort of like sliding scale based on productions or like the size of the games, because you do have your AAAs in there along with your indies and your shovelware and stuff like that, and what deserves that kind of cut, not just through the game's popularity, but based on how much Steam is probably pushing that game out there as well, and what Steam is doing as a service for that publisher. I think maybe, as I said, just a show of goodwill of lowering that. Of course, game developers are going to say, well, we would like more money, and so of course they're going to say we want less. I know that sounds like I'm just being anti a creator wanting profits, but it's sort of like, it's weird. It would be weird if they all said, yeah, this is fine, and didn't want to move that bar lower or higher. I think maybe, as I said, it's opening a point for discussion, and maybe Steam could put in some systems that maybe make the whole process a bit smoother. That opening stat, just to go back, is so confusing. About 3% said they want 30% to go down, and the other 3% say that the 30% is justified. I totally got my numbers mixed up this morning, but yeah, I think they will set the precedent for a lot of those like digital sales platforms like Epic and all that kind of stuff as well. So it just falls on them as the sort of torch holders of digital game distribution to maybe start like making the first steps towards it. But again, I don't have that solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think so Epic's had their fee at 12% for a few years now. And I think that's just part of a strategy for them to take on Steam. And if Steam still aren't seeing Epic as a legitimate, like an actual threat, then they have no real impetus to make any moves in that space. The thing that's like, and Epic does this as well, but it's not quite the same as going like, oh, I work at a lumber yard, so I sell my timber to Mitre 10, who then sell it for a 20 or 40% markup, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Because all that really Mitre 10 do is they have a shelf and have a transaction system. Steam do have a lot of back end that make games a really cool corner of your computer, right? Like they also provide refunds, which Mitre 10 does as well, but they have a social system built into it. They have a market built into it. It's more than just this one thing. So getting your game into that ecosystem comes with a price.
Yep.
And it's a huge ecosystem. Everyone is in it. So it's a little more complicated than going like, well, if it worked to just host the link to your executable yourself, like Radiohead did within Rainbows, it's like you just pay us through our own website for the game. If it was that easy to get the exposure that way, then people would just do that. So there's a balance to be struck. Perhaps 30% is too much, but I think 30% is not just like a holder's right. It's also just like this is the support system that you're buying into. So It's an
Yeah.
interesting one.
That's true.
Like Gus, this might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I'm not a games economist. But you're right, Pete. Like the feature for me, beyond the fact that it's a storefront which I open all the time, like I always have Steam running on my computer, so I'm always looking at the store and when things pop up. But Steam Cloud is like, I take it for granted now that anytime I play a Steam game, or the majority of the time, I can just delete that off my computer and then re-download it, and my save will just come back with it. When that doesn't happen, I get very surprised, and I've been burnt a couple of times because I just assume it's now a feature on everything. I still, to me, in my gut, I feel like now 30% still feels like a huge take. I do this thing every time like a Stardew Valley or something comes out and you read a story where they're like, we just shipped 30 million units. I immediately like look at the price, times it by 30 million. And then and I do this for games where it's like, I did it for the last one I did it for Valheim, when I'm like, well, I know this is a team of 5 people. So how much money did these 5 people just make? But then when I go, okay, now I need to remove 30% of this. It's like, if you made $90 million, then you need to remove $30 million from your profits. And that just seems like $30 million is such a huge astronomical amount of money for the fact that your game is sitting on that server with some of those features that you added, Pete. But then, like you said, the flip side is, would you ship 30 million copies of that game if you weren't this accessible? I think that the only way that this will really lower, because I don't think Steam need to be the good guy. I think they kind of like, despite the fact that there are some issues with their store in terms of like the amount of just shit that's on it now. I think they are kind of seen as the good guy, or like the one that we're with at the moment. And it's not until there's like a really viable competitor that they need to do this, because this is the thing that's keeping. That 30% cut is what kept Gabe Newell in New Zealand not doing anything for a year. It's keeping him in sandals, boys. So you don't want to get rid of that too soon.
Yeah, you'd hate to see him in steel toe boots, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that guy, like, he's not cut out. He's like me, and it's like, these hands have never done a day's labor in their life. These hands are for typing. A new way, though, that Steam could be looking at making money is dipping that sandaled foot into the NFT market, just like Hasbro apparently are going to be doing. Hasbro CEO says NFTs could be coming in Magic the Gathering among their other holdings. Charlie Hall from Polygon writes that Hasbro CEO Brian Goldner says his company is working on bullshit NFT technology. I added the word bullshit. And that it could be applied to collectibles in the company's portfolio, including Magic the Gathering. Responding to questions from analysts during a quarterly earnings call on Tuesday, Goldner indicated that NFTs could be an option for several brands in the portfolio. Quote, NFTs are a real opportunity for us. As you know, we have so many brands that really operate on multiple demographic levels, whether it's Transformers, whether it's Magic and the D&D brand, and brands like G.I. Joe. We have a team that... I'm just laughing at the idea of G.I. Joe. We have a team that is leading our effort out in the West Coast. We have our arms around this and see multiple opportunities on the NFT side, and you'll hear more about that as we move forward. But we are actively developing our opportunities here, and we do see it as substantial. Peter, Jesus. NFTs... I'm going to say, apart from all the real problems in the world, the worst thing that has happened this year.
Yes, I agree. But I can't look at this and go like, well, I can't blame them for trying to sell the fucking ground land card to some person for $100. It's like, whatever.
Imagine like owning just green like the land card with that one artwork.
It's one of those things where it's more damnation on the buyer than the seller.
Yeah,
it's like, it doesn't feel manipulative because you're spending money for fucking nothing, but people want to do it, so they do.
But do you see it as like, because when I thought of this, I was like, the thing that I think the way that we think about NFTs at the moment is someone took a picture of a piece of art and sold it for $69 million. But the way that it could work in, say, Magic the Gathering, as a perfect example, is there are 4 million land cards and there are 4 million NFTs around those land cards. So it's not like you just own the land card. It's basically any card that you buy is its own unique card that then you can sell to other people, but they're constant, like on the back end, Hasbro is always getting a cut of your sale. Like it's like we're transferring the rights of this thing to you, and then when you transfer the rights to someone else, we're getting a clip on the back end of like 10% or something. Like that way of going, it's kind of creating these cards to be like real. Kind of like what Artifact was doing, I guess, of the card marketplace and stuff.
True, they were doing that. It was like, just that, like adding that, as you would call it, insubstantial.
Still horrible, though.
Yeah, like a small insubstantial value to each digital card does give them as you said, sort of 2 clips of the ticket when they do want to then have those cards continually being rotated through the audience who are, the player base and that sort of thing as well. And I think Pete's spot on when he says this is by no means like a dig at Hasbro or the people working behind Magic going, this system exists and like we're more than happy to attach it to what is already kind of like the perfect game or system for NFTs to be applied to.
I think we should totally dig them. We should dig them. They're like the only, and yes, they're a company, right? But like the only way they're framing this, and Sega are doing the same thing. Like Sega came out and said that they're looking at potentially doing the same thing with their back catalog of games. I don't know what that means, but like they're looking at it as well. Like they're a company, but the only way they're framing it is like, think of the money we could make with this, as opposed to like, we have a cool idea for this. We're just trying to figure out how to capitalize on this the most now.
I do think the biggest problem with digital card games is that, and Hearthstone, whatever, is that you spend a fuck ton of money buying digital packs that you never really own.
Totally.
The game goes under, the server shuts down, you lose everything. That could still happen here, but Magic has kind of stood the test of time. It does give players the power to sell their cards. Potentially, if that's how it works. The market is different than a traditional trading card thing where the condition of a card plays into its value as well as the rarity of the card.
Yeah.
But I need to think about it more, but I think it's like this is the best version of an NFT situation. If it is that, then it is the best version of an NFT setup I've seen. Because the Sega thing was more like, oh, we're going to sell original art assets from Sonic. It's going to be a sell of it. And it's like, well, that is just playing into the same thing of like, it's worthless by itself. It's not like buying a cell from The Empire Strikes Back, like a film cell. It's like, which you actually get physically and go like, oh, cool, this is a piece of history. It's not really a piece of history, it's a digital asset.
And whereas also with the Magic stuff, it's like, you're adding this to a value of a game where there is trades and sales, whereas like someone like Sega basically taking old art assets or taking things that already exist and then basically, and correct me if I'm wrong because NFTs are fucking confusing at times, as you said, Nick, not just saying, oh, we're adding a value to this one artwork that can be sold. It's like we then, chop that artwork up in NFT form so it can be sold to like as many as they dictate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that because we were introduced to NFTs through the idea of art, then that's how we're framing it. But like you can you could just attach an NFT to anything. So it's like it's just about like you could have 4 million of the same card, but all 4 million of those cards have a non-fungible token attached to them, and so therefore they're all NFTs.
And as I'm saying, it's like there's not really a market outside of just the consumers being like, I want in on that. Whereas what you're seeing with Magic and what Pete's kind of saying here as well is that like there is a kind of an active marketplace for it to a degree that therefore makes it feel like it fits this better than, as I said, another
Lapscaling does point out that there is Wizards of the Coast already run a digital card market on some of their online platforms. So it may be consolidating that means moving everything to NFT, and that's an easy way for them to track the back end of it. or yeah, I don't know. I don't
saw a customer at the same
it's
time.
bad
I saw
if
some-
this is what it is.
I saw some people talking over the course of the week about this thing that has been brought up a few times in the last, like, I would say a year. I think since Fortnite really kicked off. And it's the idea of this metaverse game, which is basically like you buy something in one game and say, like, you basically buy an NFT to a gun or a skin, and then you can take it into other video games. So, like, you buy the Captain America skin in Fortnite, but then in other epic games like Gears of War, you can just take your Captain America skin and apply it to your character there. And I've seen some people talking about this as being like the way forward for video games, and we know one person who would think like this, who we work with occasionally, and it is like a fundamental misunderstanding of like how video games work, of being like, oh yeah, you could just like take this gun that you bought somewhere else and put it in this game, and of course a developer will be fine doing that. Not ignore the engine things, ignore everything, but even just like the balance idea of like, oh, I've taken this gun, like I've taken a machine gun into The Last of Us. It's fine. It's an NFT, and that's like, I feel like that is the future that these big companies are kind of like looking to work towards, which is like, just think about all the money we could make by selling our IP across.
You're right, and
all
totally glossing over
fucking-
how it totally doesn't gel with how gamers and how people play their games and let their games coexist next to each other. It's like, oh, this blew up in this sort of one particular sort of biome. It's just, we can copy paste it over games and make more money. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
And I am fiercely unintelligent, but I think the other thing is like when I think about NFTs, I'm like, I can't think of a creative way to use this thing. It's only commercial. So the idea of the companies getting really excited about a new way to monetize something is like, it could be the next leap after like the loot box of where or the microtransaction where all game developers or game publishers really were like, how can we implement this in our video game? And so I'm like, if this really kicks off, there's just going to be this wave of like this next form of monetization, as opposed to, oh, we've come up with a really cool interaction or a way to engage. It's kind of like, we just came up with a cool way for you to give us your money.
Yeah, look, but they already do that. Try to come up with cool, manipulative ways to take your money. Because I'm the most optimistic one of the whole group, there is a little part of me that sees this Magic the Gathering example as potentially a way to give more power back to players in this very isolated example that I'm sure will go horribly wrong. Yeah. And I didn't think about it at all until you brought up that individual cards could be owned rather than just the art that's on the card.
Yeah.
Because that is an interesting way of letting the player decide when they want to sell the thing that they, you spent thousands of dollars on Hearthstone cards. Imagine if you could just put that all back on the market and go like, I'm cashing out of Hearthstone and I'm done with it. And that would be
make a compelling point, Peter.
and those cards are still used by other people.
Yeah.
Blizzard they get a clip, but they don't make the same amount of money of like selling randomized card packs. Someone knows what they're buying. It kind of skirts around the whole gambling aspect of a card pack because you can buy the thing that you want. I don't know. I see some benefits that will be exploited in all the wrong ways, but there is some hope there, I think.
You make a good point, and I'm sad that Peter wasn't put in charge of that initial statement. Because even just your literal catchphrase of puts the power back in the hands of the gamers, I'm like, cliche, I see your point, and that's a much better sell.
Big NFT, employ me.
Yeah, seriously, that versus like, hey, do you want G.I. Joe NFTs? We have other things that we can like exploit through this now like booming monetary market. It's like, yeah.
As the actual most optimistic one among us, I hate this with all of my soul, and I'm just so scared about where it's going. I also saw, before we move on here, I saw a bunch of people in the chat going like, I'm still not really sure what an NFT is. And if you'll allow me to just read, I retweeted this a couple of days ago. Someone posted something they found on Tumblr, and it was Charlotte G, who said, I found the perfect explanation of NFTs. Imagine if you went up to the Mona Lisa and you were like, I'd like to own this. And someone nearby said, give me $65 million and I'll burn down an unspecified amount of the Amazon rainforest in order to give you this receipt of purchase. So you paid them and they went, here's your receipt. Thank you for your purchase. And went to an unmarked supply closet in the back of the museum and posted a handmade label inside behind the brooms that said Mona Lisa currently owned by Jacob Galapagos. So if anyone wants to know who owns it, they'd have to find this specific closet in this specific hallway and look behind the correct brooms. And you went, can I take the Mona Lisa home now? And they went, oh God, no, are you stupid? You only bought the receipt that says you own it. You didn't actually buy the Mona Lisa itself. You can't just take the Mona Lisa, you idiot. You can take this though. And they gave you the replica print in a cardboard tube that's sold in the gift shop. Also, the person selling you the receipt of purchase at no point in any has at no point in time ever owned the Mona Lisa. Unfortunately, if this doesn't really make sense or seems like any logical person would be happy about this exchange, then you have understood NFTs perfectly.
Amazing.
Very, very good. So yeah,
I like
we'll see
that
how this
analogy
goes.
even has the like aggression of when you buy it and go, can I have it? It's like, no, fuck you. It's like that's kind of the system that it is currently. Like
Totally.
the aggression.
So let's move to something that we can all be excited about. And by all, I mean me be really excited, Gus
Arcade Blob,
potentially
Arcade Blob
excited,
is in the chat.
and Arcade Blob is in the chat.
No, Arcade Blob might not be, but Arcade Blob it's the only thing they talk about.
Oh, right, okay. I also know Nicritex will be excited by this. There are people excited about this. Pete was the most excited when he got me excited when he broke news that wasn't real news. Outer Wilds is getting a DLC drop. Probably. I first heard about this when Peter posted Outer Wilds have released DLC on the Steam store, just shadow dropped it. And I basically had an orgasm. Then it turns out to be slightly different than that. But Imogen Beck Helling from Rock Paper Shotgun writes, it looks like the time looping space exploration game Outer Wilds might be getting a DLC, something named Outer Wilds Echoes of the Eye, has popped up in Steam's records. This little leak was circulated on Twitter last night, and rather than simply ignoring the rumor, the game's publisher Annapurna Interactive shared the tweet and added a cheeky eye emoji. It's not exactly confirmation that a DLC is happening, but it's certainly not a denial either. So there's no other info here. It was added on April 28th. It could be some sort of DLC, but Gus, I want you to preemptively get excited about this for when you play this game this year.
I want to be excited by this, and you're right, it might be perfect timing for the fact that I haven't played it, and I've promised to play this game to completion on stream at some point. But yeah, unlike you, I didn't have a little leak when I heard the news as well, because I am yet to actually have any...
Is that how you describe your orgasms? A little leak?
Oh, that's what it said he said the little leak was circulated on Twitter, and I thought they were referencing your reaction. Yeah, I am excited that this game still exists in the minds and in the hearts of its fans, and also in the minds of the developers who feel like there's more to explore outside of a direct sequel. So yeah, this is cool. If I love it as much as you've told me I'm going to, then this is good news to have something to play afterwards. But I still am yet to cross the threshold of even getting past the opening first 20 minutes. So I will be excited, I'm sure. Peter, have you played any?
I've played the same amount as you. I kind of got off the planet, that first planet, and went to the first place and was like,
everyone went to the water planet.
I did go to the water planet, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, it's a good game if you push through that, but it's bad game design that so many people drop off at early because their game is bad to that point. And if you push through it is. Yeah. It is. It's like abrasive. It's not a pretty game. It's not particularly fun to play.
No. Not pretty is entirely subjective. That's not
true.
Objective.
In my opinion, looking at all these assets, it is not a pretty game. Yeah, it's weird fish eye, like pretty basic low poly texture stuff.
Yeah.
But there can be a beauty in a style, and I think if they made the start a bit more streamlined, maybe it would break what the game is. But you can only blame the game for pushing people away.
Arcade Blob says it's fucking gorgeous. Fuck you, you piece of shit.
No, but to that point as well, it is like some of my favorite experiences in gaming are by pushing through a game that most often visually doesn't engage with me, be it the art style, be it the sort of just direction it's going in. And so if anything, I know this sounds like I'm just preaching, like I'm excited that this game doesn't look like my jam, so that if I do fall in love with it, it'll be even more of a kind of like, oh, it doesn't tap into those things that I really like, be it a visual and sort of aesthetic quality as well. So it's a weird thing to hang on to, but knowing people have such an like adoration for this game, I'm happy to be like, maybe I will fall in love with this murky art style of being lost in caves with a shit torch.
And,
I mean, I think it's. Sorry,
you're the only one who's played the game, Nick. Do you like through? Do you think that it? Where does DLC fit?
So that's what. Yeah. So
game,
that's what
which I know is a very focused idea, and the whole thing is built around just this one like idea, right? Of like getting this story told to you in this way. Is DLC a thing that can work in this game?
It's one of those things where like I got incredibly excited and then I went like, what are they going to do? Because the game, like to that point about the beginning, I hear you. To me, it's the same as like Dota or Dark Souls or something where I'm like, all of these games are just like overwhelming when you get into them. And this doesn't look like it should be overwhelming. It's not like complex in the same way as something like, or like, it's not like there are tons of systems that you need to learn like Dota or something. But the reason that it starts like that is because it kind of like narratively and the way that gameplay informs is informed by the story. It kind of has to do that. But the flip side of that is that I don't know what you add to this. To me, this was, and Gus, like block your ears if you don't want to be overhyped again. This to me is one of those games where I'm like, I wish I could forget that I played it so I could play it again. It's that special to me, and particularly just the way that it wraps up. I'm like, that is just such a complete thought of a video game. It is such a beautiful, the ending sequence is such a beautiful thing that you go through. So dipping myself back into like my sandaled foot back into this world, I'm like, I wonder what
Mr. Newell, you've returned.
I wonder if does it lessen the impact now that it's a game about endings. And so if there is actually, and we don't know what this is, it could be like, my ideal is that this is like a second game. It's like a little mini expansion that's like its own standalone thing, and
I mean, just
it informs more of the world. But like the idea that I'm going back to this world actually doesn't even work in a narrative sense and a structural sense of how the game works. So yeah,
there's all the chance that the developers' cheeky eyes that we're working on a sequel or a similar game, or sorry, like another game entirely. So just the idea that their response is based off DLC rumors doesn't mean that that's exactly what it is. Otherwise, Nick, you can go back. And
it's not like it's a rumor, but from data mining. So it's not just like it was pulled out of someone's ass. It's like Echoes of the Eye
as DLC.
is literally listed as DLC on the back end of Steam. So who knows what it could become.
Be it another adventure that takes place in that universe or something, we won't know. Otherwise, Nick can just enjoy this adventure again wearing a hat or something that they've added.
yeah, totally. It's just a very expensive hat DLC. But it is an interesting thing of going like one of my top 5 games of all time. And I'm like both incredibly excited by the idea of there could be more, but also like don't. So I'll just see if it like, and in the same way as the Last of Us thing, right? Like I didn't want Last of Us 2 until you gave me Last of Us 2, and then I went, actually, like you did have more story to tell. So if you've got more story to tell and you do it in a way that was as special as the first one, then I am there for you, Outer Wilds. I am there. I also just wanted to point out the lovely last paragraph on the Rock Paper Shotgun review of the game from Brendan, who said, overflowing with a toyish love of astronomy and physics, it jettisons stuffing formulae for adventures on dangerous planets full of sand and one-way trips to icy comets hurtling through around the sun. We don't do star ratings on Rock Paper Shotgun, but if we did, I'd give Outer Wilds a small galaxy. And I'm like, that's a lovely line. Here's something less lovely. And speaking of cash grabs that we did before, if you want to become a esports commentator, then a path that you might want to take is to get an esports certification exam. A company called the Esports Certification Institute appeared last week with an offer. Pay $299 US. And then in brackets, normally $399. So it's like you're already discounted the thing when you've launched it to take an exam. If you pass, you'll earn a certification that tells employers in the esports industry that you understand the esports scene and grasp basic business terms, marketing concepts, and statistical problems. The ECI says that getting certified can help you get noticed and find your esports dream job. The certification has support from a number of esports organization CEOs and professionals, but then a lot of people aren't convinced that a $400 certification exam is something entry-level job applicants need on their resumes. Pete, you've watched a fair amount of esports over your life. Do you think that these people would be better off with some sort of TAFE certificate?
Absolutely. I'm sick of idiots hosting game commentary.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Particularly local League of Legends.
Oh, absolutely.
The worst.
Unqualified, uneducated. Would you
We're talking about the current league scene, right? We're talking about the current one.
Not last
season.
Not last season.
Yeah, good.
No, obviously it's absurd. There's definitely background knowledge that you need and an understanding of some things that you'd need for that role. I haven't been a caster. But to assume that it's not a learned skill. I mean, it is in some ways, but also there's an inherent skill that you hone as opposed to you go to a course to learn how to be a good commentator. I would be atrocious at it. And I understand Dota very well, but if you asked me to cast a game, it would be a disaster. There's a little reference for you at home. Who watched Dota? It's a disaster. I had to explain it because I just saw blank faces looking at me.
No, I get
particularly
it.
from Gus, who's mad.
It's
a disaster. So, like, I think it becomes really obvious when someone is good very quickly. We spent 5 minutes next to Miles, and it was very clear he had it. It's one of those few jobs that needs an absolute it factor.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, you're not going to be able to buy that anyway.
Is this, though, solely just reading through that again, though? Like, is this solely directed at people who want to be casters or want to be in the commentary scene versus there are companies, publishers, whole back-end systems set up that need, accountants, that need people like working through different parts of the job that aren't front facing, that might need an understanding of esports? As they say, they're like, there's, business terms, marketing concepts, statistical problems. Is this solely for, there is. Is this solely for casters? Because I didn't get that straight away.
That's a very good question. I believe that it is aimed at casters, because the esports
saying the
industry,
dream job thing is, I can see where that's aimed.
And also, because the esports industry is actually kind of weird in that it's like, what you see on screen is almost all of it. It's like the teams are really small. Most of the teams are the people who play, and then like a coach and a manager and a CEO or something. The people who promote the game are like the marketing department of the publisher and stuff. It's not like a sort of like, it's not like football where you just go, there are just millions of people around the world employed in the support staff of esports. Esports are like this very small thing that basically all the money goes on screen.
Sure.
So I think that, and there were some questions. Now, these were not necessarily confirmed to be from it, but I saw a ton of people associated with the coverage of this referencing this. So I'm going to say it's probably from it. But the questions from the exam, some of them were like, a Valorant player reports the following kills from their match: 10, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 21, 22, 25, 26, 29, 35, 37, 38. What is the value of the third quartile of the data set? And it's like, that is information that is not, like you said, Pete, not what makes a good caster. Math savants aren't good casters. Personable people who are quick on their feet in terms of how they convey information, not data sets, are the things that make for great casters. And all the best casters that I can think of. Sorry, go.
Sorry, man. I was just going to say there are next to casters, there are often analysts who are the ones that kind of pull figures out, but they're pulling figures out that make sense to the audience as well. Things like that, how well they did in the fourth quartile, are not exciting pieces of information. Where, and my only frame of reference is for Dota, there's a guy called Purge. And Purge is not a huge character like a Miles Ross, but he is someone who sees the game in a really analytical way and can distill what happened down into a way that makes it clear to the audience and makes it interesting to the audience. It's like
even translate it for the audience to a degree as well.
Exactly. Like he's a translator of that information.
Totally.
And which, maybe he's doing that in his head before he's turning it into something more palatable. But it's also like it's just a weird thing to put in an exam. It just feels like they want people to do this thing, fail, have another crack at it, fail again, or even pass and have a useless piece of paper for $600.
Yeah, but it does also
like
make
an
me
arts
think
degree.
about
Am I right?
Yeah, well,
Anyway.
that's so true. Because what this made me think was like I saw a lot of people ripping it apart and that sort of thing, and I was like, yeah, like this is just like ultimately it doesn't mean anything. Like it's come from a place where you go like all the things it's testing for are things that you've probably. You can display in other ways, and that you don't necessarily need like this one weird exam. But it also made me go, isn't this how like TAFE started or like universities started, where it's just like at some point some scrappy upstart went, I think if we're gonna let people walk into a courtroom, then they're going to need to pay us a lot of money to get a piece of paper that says we think they're allowed to go in a courtroom. And who decided to be that person? So it was like, we could be like, we're ripping on it now. We could be witnessing the beginning of the new Harvard. This could be like someone has decided to attach. This is an NFT that someone has decided to attach worth to a degree that no one else has gone. We need, but in 60 years' time, it'll be like everyone has an esports degree. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Equally, it's like the idea.
Thanks for humoring me, Pete.
No, I think that's actually quite humorous and sort of actually accurate as well. But the idea is as well that like it's not the piece of paper at the end of a university or TAFE course or whatever that is important. It's what you learnt along the way. And what I find strange here is that this is being marketed as an exam, not as a course to learn these skills.
That's so smart. Yes.
So I'm kind of like, maybe that is involved. Like at 300 to 400 US, maybe there is like, hey, there's a ramp up process. You get to go over it all and they will maybe like hone you towards the exam you're going to do. But just to pay to do the exam is where the thing that really jumped out at me. I would feel just as scammy about the news that they are also doing a paid course to learn about esports, but at least I can see there that they are trying to, instill the knowledge base into people who want to learn and who just keep hitting the wall. So yeah, I find that interesting as an observation that it's not a course, it's an exam. So that's even more scammy in my opinion.
I am so happy. Like that statement was proof that if you talk about something long enough, you'll find the point. And that was it. That's so true, that this is just the exam and not the education. That it's like, if I could just go $400, let me just see if I could pass the medical exam.
Can I
like,
sit
let me
the
just
bar?
let me just try.
To sit it. I just want to see what happens when I sit there.
And see what happens. Because on the fluke chance that I pass it, I got a law degree for $400.
It's the equivalent of asking one of our audience to come into the studio and pay you $300 to guess the order of one of your lists.
Yes.
You're like,
good.
What's at the top?
Good. Yeah.
No,
good.
Sorry, you failed.
And also because, like, finally, and I did see, what was it? Pearly27 said this is a professional certificate, just like they have in thousands of other careers. It's just to certify to potential employers that you have a set of skills. I think my thing is that, like, like you said, Gus, the place to learn these things is when you get the job. Like, you learn on the job with esports. You just learn on the job, so you already have the job. Anyway, lots of interesting things about this. I'm sure that at some point it's just going to all fall apart, and we'll move on. Something that I hope doesn't fall apart. IO Interactive is reportedly making a fantasy game, even though I wrote in the script a Fanta-ass game for Xbox.
You left the Y off fantasy, and I added the second S.
Good. Thank you
All
very
my
much,
notes
Peter.
are now useless thanks to knowing this. My Fantask game theories are out the window.
This is such a more boring story now. Natalie Clayton from PC Gamer reports that Hitman developer IO Interactive is reportedly working on a new fantasy IP for Xbox. According to reports from Windows Central, the outlet was told of a new IP named Project Dragon had come up in talks between IO and Microsoft. These reports were corroborated by Eurogamer, whose sources explained the project is AAA in scope, though still very early in development. Project Dragon is reportedly a connected world RPG with various job listings searching for multiplayer network programmers. One now pulled listing spotted by Windows Central even lists the team name as Dragon. Eurogamer sources elaborated, saying the game would take place in a, quote, medieval-esque world featuring dragons. IO really in a good spot after the release of Hitman 3, when it was looking a bit dicey for them, jumping from publisher to publisher with literally every Hitman game they released. Pete, you enjoyed some of your time with Hitman, and that's probably the most interaction you've had with IO. There's no way to tell if this is good, but it's good for IO.
Absolutely, it's good for IO. It's cool that they're proving themselves to be a potential next big kind of AAA team, and still independent of being underneath a Sony or a Microsoft kind of banner. So we might see some really cool things from them in the next few years. Like, obviously, Hitman, I think is excellent, but it still feels pretty B game to me. It feels like a AA game in a lot of ways.
Interesting.
The design is AAA, and just the feel is AA. The way things move, some of the animations, it's like, and it's all part of the game. But
feels a bit more AA than the presentation of it. I would agree.
I totally know what you mean. Do you think part of it is because it's chopped up worlds? Like, it's like, anytime I think of like a AAA game, I think I struggle to think of a AAA game that isn't something that, I guess maybe Mario games.
No,
but
because like
where like Hitman is just like you load into this level and then you load out of it and then you load into a new level, as opposed to like.
No, it's just a feel thing, because the split, the levels being the size that they are, is perfect for this game. Like, whether they could render double or triple these worlds is irrelevant, because it would be wrong for the game. So it's clever game design that they are the way they are.
Well, I more meant like the fact that you keep going back to a menu to select this next thing, as opposed to being like drawn through a world. You're just kind of like hopping between literal levels.
Yeah, maybe the presentation in that way of like a cutscene doesn't feel that good. Good direction and stuff between the worlds feels a little old school game design.
But definitely, like you said, like the shooting is terrible in them and that sort of thing, where you just go like that game feel stuff.
There's also, like, as Pete was saying about just the feel in terms of like the engine, the movement, the systems that are in play for a Hitman game, because it is closer to a true sandbox game where it's like you are let loose in an area, unlike, you know, a AAA polished God of War kind of game where the physicality of the person moving through the space has directed camera, has, you know, that sort of like pre-orchestrated moves that make it look like cinematic. You can be super janky in this because you have the freedom to do all these possibilities, which is always kind of like a catch-22 when you want to open up a game to total freedom. It's like, you know, it will always then look a bit video game-esque, or feel a bit video gamey, I guess, even though you've got this very beautiful, glossy, and cool design style around it as well. So that's what
it's definitely part of the fun of the jankiness is part of the fun of it. Whatever jankiness is left, it helps the game. Like the idea of putting a person in a dumpster, which we just saw, happens really quickly. Changing clothes is not an ordeal, because that would make the game less fun. Yeah, but also it just feels weird and jumpy. It kind of breaks the illusion of the reality of the world, but it makes the game heaps better for it. Obviously, they attracted the 007 license with how well they've been making these Hitman games. And
don't
now
forget
Microsoft,
Kane and Lynch, everyone's favorite Kane and Lynch.
I had
It was a
forgotten
good
Kane
game.
and Lynch.
It's a great game.
So with that, and with Microsoft interested in potentially doing a fantasy game with them, there's going to be some big expansion in the studio to get multiple teams working across multiple projects potentially at the same time. Very cool for IO, and yeah, I'm sure we'll just see like more and more.
It's cool for
stuff
them. I don't know if fantasy is where I want them to go. Like,
Well, I think I don't think it would be
yeah.
in this style of game.
No.
We're
We're not
dragon in
garroting a
little
dragon or
sandbox.
something like that. But at the same time, like,
And then dressing up like the dragon.
Yeah.
I just think that, like, I don't know. I think this is, as a genre in itself, like, the Hitman games are pretty unique in the sense that, you know, you could just simulate them to something. Sorry, put them as similar, something like a Splinter Cell or something. But, like, they're very unique in that sense. So hopefully they take a new style of gameplay to the fantasy realm to a degree. And I'm not saying it has to be a stealth-based, you know, assassin game, obviously. But I don't know. I'm just tired of fantasy at my age. I just like them to do something ambitious. I'm more excited for the Bond project, Project Dragon, which is the best working title because you just know it cannot be called that in the end. So when it is, I will eat my my beret in this case. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not as excited for the fact that it's fantasy, but as you said, really good for IO and awesome to see them working on another bigger project.
Yeah, and because they, like you said, they got the 007 thing. They opened up a new studio in Barcelona as well. Hitman 3 was the best performing game in the Hitman series, and if you followed like the development of the Hitman series, the new Hitmans, because it was under IDOS all the time until we got to Absolution, I think, and then Absolution was Square Enix. And then Square Enix did the first Hitman, and then that was when it was episodic. And then Hitman 2 was Warner Brothers, and then Hitman 3 nearly didn't get made, and IO just basically bet on themselves and self-published it. And it was the correct choice. And so they've just made an absolute bomb from that game. And yeah, it's just opened up these opportunities that you got the 007 thing, you've got potentially this Microsoft AAA scope multiplayer connected RPG thing. These guys are going to be solid for a while. But I really do hope they return to Hitman, because they're just like, no one else is making that kind of game as well. So it's just like, it's such a, you're
Action
right, Pete,
sandbox puzzle game.
Yeah, it's just like, it's such a specific thing. It is just like, oh yeah, this is like Hitman. When it comes out, I'm like, oh yeah, no other game is like this. And it's just really satisfying to play and so much fun with such a quirky sense of humor. So yeah, I'm just really thrilled for IO because I just like to see good people get successful. Speaking of not good people who have somehow found some modicum of success in their life, we're going to end today with Australian politician and, in my personal opinion, so that we don't get sued, professional idiot Craig Kelly picks a fight with Cyberpunk about the one thing that no one had a problem with about Cyberpunk. And last week, Craig Kelly just tweeted out, for some reason, what type of world do we live in today when the woke try and cancel Dr. Seuss, while Cyberpunk 2077 is all the rage, where, quote, 4 types of damage can be inflicted and resisted: physical, thermal, EMP, and chemical. Pete, what the fuck is he talking about?
I think only he knows. It's very funny how clear it is that he does not understand what he's talking about.
Yep.
That's the quote that he lifted.
Totally.
He tweets around that like it has, like, there's meaning greater than
as though what it is like the game is all about kidnapping people and then subjecting them to EMP damage.
Yeah.
Oh, my watch.
It's very, very, very strange.
It's just so dumb. I think there's nothing, unless, Gus, you have something fascinating. There's nothing to really talk about this other than the fact that, just like, when I saw that Craig Kelly had interacted with Cyberpunk, I was just like, oh God, 2 disasters merging.
No, I'm with you in the sense that I was trying to translate this earlier and just be like, what the fuck is he on about? And at best, I can take away that he's like, oh, why are we being so woke about Dr. Seuss when there's a very violent game and the idea of 4 different kinds of violence? But I love that it's in there with 4 different types of damage can be inflicted and resisted. So it's like, it's like, it's not just like, oh, this game has 4 different new types of violence, which, as a politician, you'd be like, well, we have enough trouble stopping just physical violence. I've never thought of EMP or chemical, but the game's also like, you can resist it if you want as well. You can like fight back or just like have a buff. But yeah, which proves that this is just copy pasted out of like, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. But wonderful when politicians do decide to dip their sandal toe into the world of video games.
He tweeted it out a day after my birthday, and I like to think it was just a late birthday gift for me. So thank you, Craig Kelly. All right, that is literally all the video game news that happened this week, and in the case of the last story, at the end of the week before. There's nothing else you need to know.